When I first received the job offer, I couldn't believe my luck. It was the kind of opportunity people dream about but rarely ever get a generous salary to work on a private island, away from the chaos of city life. The letter was short on details, which, looking back now, should have made me suspicious. It didn't say who the employer was or what my duties would entail, just that I would be the sole caretaker of a mansion on a secluded island for 3 months with free room and board, plus a handsome paycheck at the end of it. Desperation clouds judgment. I had been unemployed for months, scraping by on odd jobs and credit cards. When the letter came, I didn't think twice. I called the number provided and accepted the position without hesitation. A part of me was excited. A private island meant isolation, tranquility, maybe even adventure. I pictured myself lounging by a pristine beach, sipping cocktails between light housekeeping tasks. What I got was something else entirely. The instructions were simple. I was to meet a boat at the harbor at dawn, which would take me to the island. No name was given for the island, no indication of who owned it. Just a one-way ticket to somewhere I had never heard of. I arrived at the docks early, my backpack slung over my shoulder. A sleek, black speedboat was waiting, but there were no signs or markings on it, just a silent man standing at the helm. His face was expressionless, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. I introduced myself, expecting at least a polite nod or a few words, but he merely gestured for me to get in. The journey was unnervingly quiet. As the boat sped across the water, I tried to make small talk, asking where we were headed, who my employer was, but the man didn't respond. He kept his focus straight ahead, his grip tight on the wheel. The only sound was the roar of the engine and the slap of waves against the boat's hull. I watched as the mainland shrank into the distance, feeling a gnawing unease settle in my stomach. Something about the vast emptiness of the ocean, the isolation, was starting to get to me. Hours passed before the island finally came into view, and when it did, it wasn't the tropical paradise I had envisioned. The island was small, jagged, and dark, its landscape dominated by towering cliffs and dense, twisted trees that seemed to choke the shoreline. The mansion sat atop a rise, a hulking silhouette of stone and shadow. It looked old, abandoned, like something out of a Gothic novel. The air itself felt wrong, heavy with moisture, and something else's sense of being watched. The boat slowed as we neared the dock, and I could feel my pulse quicken. The driver cut the engine, and we coasted in, bumping gently against the wooden pier. Without a word, the man handed me a folded note. I took it, but before I could ask any questions, he was already turning the boat around. I stood there, stunned, as the boat sped off, leaving me alone on the dock. I unfolded the note. It was brief, just like the letter that had offered me the job. Welcome. Follow the path to the house. Your quarters are ready. Work begins tomorrow. The path wound up a steep hill through a thick, oppressive forest. The trees pressed in on all sides, their branches tangled and gnarled like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. The farther I walked, the quieter it became. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of my boots on the dirt path. Every now and then I thought I heard something rustling in the trees, the faint snap of a twig, but when I stopped to listen, the silence swallowed it up. By the time I reached the mansion, the sun was beginning to set. The building was even larger and more imposing up close. It loomed over me, its tall windows dark and lifeless. The front door was massive, made of heavy, weathered wood with iron fixtures that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. I knocked, though I wasn't sure who, if anyone, would answer. The door creaked open, and I stepped into a grand hall. A woman stood at the far end of the room, her back to me. She was tall, with a severe posture, and iron-gray hair pulled back into a tight bun. She turned slowly, her face set in a stern, impassive expression. "You must be the caretaker," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "Follow me." I tried to ask her about the job, about the house, but she dismissed my questions with curt, one-word answers. Her name was Mrs. Gibbons, and she had been with the family for many years, though she never clarified who the family was or where they were now. She led me upstairs to a small, sparsely furnished bedroom. "Dinner is at 7, she said, and then she left without another word. That first night I dined alone in a cavernous dining room. Mrs. Gibbons served me in silence, then disappeared into the shadows, leaving me with my thoughts and the eerie creak of the old house settling around me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, though I saw no one else. The island, the house, it all felt like a place trapped in time, forgotten by the outside world. As the evening wore on, the wind outside picked up, howling like a wounded animal. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I imagined those dark, empty windows staring back at me. Finally, after hours of tossing and turning, I decided to take a walk. I thought the fresh air might clear my mind. I headed down to the shore, following a narrow path that led from the mansion to the beach. The night was cloudy, the moon occasionally peeking through the thick, shifting clouds. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocks was oddly soothing, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I felt a sense of calm. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a dark shape on the shoreline, half submerged in the surf. I thought it might be a piece of driftwood or debris washed in by the tide, but as I got closer, a rancid, overwhelming stench hit me, and I realized with growing horror that it was something much worse. The thing was massive, at least the size of a man, but grotesquely bloated and twisted beyond recognition. Its skin was gray, mottled with dark patches of decay, and its limbs were long, spindly, with far too many joints. Its head, or what I assumed was its head, was misshapen, with gaping holes where eyes should have been and a mouth that sagged open, revealing rotting, blackened teeth. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. The creature's body was limp, but there was something unsettling about it, as if it had been alive not long ago. The waves lapped against it, dragging it slightly with each pull of the tide. My breath caught in my throat as a low, wet gurgling sound came from its throat. It was still alive. I turned and ran, my legs barely carrying me fast enough as the wind seemed to howl in time with my frantic heartbeat. My footsteps pounded against the sand, but I swore I could hear something behind me, a slow, deliberate dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled through the water. By the time I reached the mansion, I was breathless, my body shaking with terror. I slammed the door behind me, collapsing against it, trying to catch my breath. What the hell had I just seen? Was it a creature or something worse? I had no idea, but I knew one thing: I couldn't stay here. I went straight to Mrs. Gibbons' quarters, banging on the door until she answered. I blurted out everything, my words spilling over each other in panic, but she only listened with that same cold, impassive expression. When I finished, she stared at me for a long moment before finally speaking. "Things wash up on this island," she said. "Things that don't belong. Stay inside at night, and you'll be fine." That was it. No further explanation. No reassurance. She shut the door in my face, leaving me standing there reeling. The island wasn't just isolated, it was cursed. And whatever washed ashore last night was just the beginning. The next morning, I returned to the shore, half expecting to find the creature still there, but it was gone, leaving behind only a faint imprint in the sand where its body had been. No sign of struggle, no indication of where it had gone. It was as though it had never existed. Days passed, and the island's strange, oppressive atmosphere only deepened. Every night, more things washed ashore, broken pieces of ships, odd, twisted carcasses, things I couldn't even begin to identify. Each time they seemed to come closer to the house. One evening, as I lay in bed, I heard it again, the slow, deliberate dragging sound. It was closer this time, right outside my window. My heart raced, and I leapt out of bed, throwing the curtains aside. There, on the beach in the pale moonlight, I saw it. The thing that had washed up was crawling, pulling itself toward the mansion with grotesque, jerking motions. Its two long limbs clawed at the sand, leaving deep furrows behind it. It moved with agonizing slowness, its gaping mouth hanging open in a silent scream.